With this, the concluding lecture in our course on cultural heritage tourism and placemaking, let's visit some places that are famously successful and have a rich and evocative sense of place. Keep in mind that placemaking is a process, not primarily a project, though projects can contribute, can help make sense of place. Every place has a past and observable assets and amenities. It's not about being the biggest or the best or having the most traffic and visitation. It is about improving how the places we care about affect visitors and residents because at the end of the day, community thrives on inspiration and aspiration. Places with aspiration can become inspirational. The point is to keep at it. Keep making the little adjustments and envisioning, when possible, transformational change. As we will see, even the most successful destinations did not become that way overnight, nor was excellence achieved by accident. Let's start exploring Charleston, South Carolina. Although only the 78th largest metropolitan region in the country, about the size of Greater Springfield and the Pioneer Valley region in Massachusetts, it is one of the top 5 leading heritage destinations in the United States, with a tourism industry that grosses $1.4 billion a year and employs almost 20,000 people. The city is presently experiencing the third highest growth rate of any among the top 155 metro regions in the country, only one of which, Austin, Texas, is among the top 100. But there are many reasons for this, but a rich sense of place is a major contributing factor. Alas, while Charleston was, on the eve of the American Revolution, the fourth largest port city in the colonies, its economy was in ruins after the Civil War and then faced a devastating earthquake 20 years later. By the 1930s, after 70 or 80 years of slow to no growth, Charleston became a place time forgot. As is true elsewhere, thanks to the Daughters of the American Revolution and the colonial dames, historic preservation got off to an early start in Charleston, about 1900, when those organizations began acquiring and preserving important landmarks. But the next big step was in the 1920s when the Preservation Society of Charleston was founded. It's the oldest community-based historic preservation organization in the United States. In 1931, the Society was instrumental in persuading Charleston City Council to pass the first zoning ordinance enacted in the United States to protect historic resources. Then in 1947, Historic Charleston Foundation was founded. Beginning in the 1950s, under the leadership of Francis Ravenel Edmonds, Historic Charleston Foundation pioneered the use of a revolving fund in historic preservation. Advocacy, education, and easements helped spark a revolution aided by the contemporaneous widespread option of air conditioning, which made living in the South a little more tolerable. The origin of this kind of supercharged advocacy really was an important development in the 1960s and 70s. Ada Louise Huxtable, one of the great architectural critics and writers of the 20th century, wrote about adaptive reuse as it originated in Charleston and talked about how it takes imagination, ingenuity, and zeal, and assumes correctly that some old buildings are better than new ones. This was kind of a revolutionary idea in the 1960s and 70s, and as we know, was kind of a countermeasure to the onslaught of urban renewal. There are many aspects to the economic miracle that became Charleston, and we won't go into all of them. But in the 1930s, actually going back to the 20s, was the beginnings of this kind of Charleston Renaissance. And it's interesting that artists played a key role in this. Some of the better known Impressionist artists from the North actually came down and began painting there. But probably the most influential figure was Alice Ravenel Huger Smith, whose famous book, Carolina Rice Plantation of the 1850s series, really helped people see a world that they'd lost and to kind of visualize this ancient historical cultural matrix that Charleston had been. These images, which capture with almost archaeological fidelity a sense of what plantation life might have looked like, really have helped shape our historiography and perspective on slavery and plantation life on the eve of the Civil War. Of course, Charleston is famously where the Civil War began and where the move towards secession, or after the election of Abraham Lincoln, began, and where the first shots that opened the Civil War and firing on Fort Sumter off of in Charleston Harbor began in April of 1861. The National Park Service, the Fort Sumter is a national park outpost, and their presence in Charleston has made a difference. The Charleston miracle really involved a kind of propitious convergence of leadership in the form of Ted Stern, who was the transformational president of the College of Charleston, who quadrupled its economy and its student body during his tenure in the 60s and 70s. And then Joe Riley, the long-serving mayor of Charleston, was first elected in 1975, just as the preservation movement was cresting, and together they had a vision. That vision involved using historic preservation and the arts as a catalyst for raising Charleston's image and reputation nationally and internationally, and for jump-starting what has become an enormous tourism industry. The Spoleto Festival, which was brought to Charleston concept from Italy in 1977, has become the leading arts festival in the United States and a catalyst for preservation and marketing of an extraordinary place. Thanks in part to the joint efforts of the Preservation Society and Historic Charleston, Charleston has a huge historic district that is protected, and it is one of the great walking cities in America. You literally could spend a week there and walking 10 and 15 miles a day and still feel that you hadn't quite seen everything. This city was truly made for walking, with literally hundreds of historic structures and tree-lined streets and lots of pedestrian amenities. Charleston is known as a city of churches, and many of these churches are situated at prominent intersections and create kind of scenic vistas along streets and alleyways. The diversity of the city is reflected in its religious heritage. On the left is the French Huguenot Church, on the right the German Lutheran Church, the Scotch, African Americans, people of English descent. There were all of these converging traditions, faith traditions and cultural traditions that were flourishing in Charleston in the 18th and early 19th century. Two of the city's most prominent landmarks shown here are St. Michael's Church on the left and St. Philip's on the right, both Anglican churches. These houses of worship are also tourist destinations that provide interpretation and programming facilities, and it all works, and again is part of the contributing dynamic that makes Charleston such an alluring destination. Again, the interiors of these houses of worship are often open to the public, and extraordinary craftsmanship and history is contained within them. One of the characteristic features of Charleston architecture are these wonderful polychromed stuccoed brick houses that one sees, and the double and sometimes triple decker verandas on that create air passage and ventilation on some of the great mansions. Color, texture, craftsmanship, variety, all commingled with nature in this wonderful walking city. Before the age of air conditioning, Southerners managed the oppressive heat through ventilation, windows, and these elaborate porches, which were an idea kind of imported from the West Indies plantations, and give the architecture here much of its scenic and distinctive character. A masterpiece of American Greek Revival architecture designed by Philadelphia architect Thomas U. Walter in 1840, Hibernian Hall was built as the home of the Hibernian Society, an Irish benevolent society, and is famous as the site of the 1860 Democratic Party convention that was so split and divided that it really led to Abraham Lincoln's election as president and really the beginning of the Civil War. Incredible history, incredible architecture. Among the historic district's 1,400 important historic structures, these are two of the most important. On the left is the South Carolina Society Hall, designed by Gabriel Madigo in 1804, the portico added in 1825. The society itself still owns the building, and it was founded in 1737. On the right is the Miles Bruton House from 1769, one of the most complete Georgian townhouse complexes in the United States. These are architectural icons. Charleston is famous for its architectural ironwork. It's wrought ironwork made by blacksmiths beginning in the 18th century, examples on almost every street. Part of what makes Charleston successful are the various visitor amenities. Easy and accessible public bathrooms, excellent signage, and this network of extraordinary professional licensed guides who interpret various aspects of the city's history. Prior to the Civil War, beginning as early as the 17th century, more than half the population of Charleston were African Americans, enslaved Africans, who did most of the work, built most of the buildings, in fact, and have an incredible cultural heritage of their own. This is one of the great stories during the Civil War. Robert Smalls, who commandeered a 149-foot Confederate transport ship and guided it out into the channel, where it was intercepted by a Federal blockade, kind of a hero of African-American liberation. First-person interpretation, interpretive signage. Again, it's Charleston is a real place and a business center, but it also has this overlay of history that is a big part of their cultural heritage economy. The city has a couple dozen museums and heritage attractions. The Charleston Museum has really state-of-the-art exhibits, extraordinary collections, and is a good jumping-off point for introducing the visitor to the history and material culture of the city. Many of the crown jewels of artifacts and historical relics can be found at the Charleston Museum. The story of Francis Marion, the swamp fox, whose sort of guerrilla tactics against the British during the American Revolution are renowned in South Carolina and American history. There was certainly a time when the Charleston experience would have soft-pedaled its economic basis in slavery, but that's no longer. Today, Charleston is one of the most interesting places in America to learn about the African-American heritage. A number of museums interpret this history very effectively, and the collections continue to improve year after year. The Charleston Museum also has extraordinary archaeological collections and displays. Ceramics really tell the story of us over the generations, and what amazing fragments these are. This prominently situated landmark houses the Museum of the Daughters of the Confederacy, and it's a must-see part of the Charleston experience, one of the most remarkable collections of Civil War artifacts and memorabilia. Apparently, until the turn of the century, veterans of the Civil War actually gave the tours, and it still has this kind of atmosphere of authenticity that has to be seen to be believed. Among the lesser-known gems, the Charleston Library Society, founded in 1748, with exhibits and displays of rare books, prints, and memorabilia. Founded in 1903 with a bequest from James Gibbs, the Gibbs Museum of Art, it contains, among other things, the largest collection of early American portraits in the country, and those wonderful watercolors of the rice plantations in the 1850s, and so many landscape views and other art treasures reflective of the cultural heritage of Charleston in South Carolina. In 1902, as one of the first preservation tactics in Charleston, the South Carolina Society of Colonial Dames acquired the old Powder magazine. Today a National Historic Landmark, it is also the oldest public building in South Carolina that houses a very family-oriented history museum. This building was designed in 1822 by architect Robert Mills, a Charleston native who became famous really for his work at in the nation's capital and working with James Hoban on the construction of the White House, designing the Washington Monument, and many other national landmarks. This was originally built in 1822 as a fireproof building for the public records of South Carolina. In 1855 it was taken on by the South Carolina Historical Society, today functioning primarily as a research library and one of the great collections of archival material for the South. Once little discussed, today the institution of slavery is very much part of the story that is told in visiting Charleston. The old Slave Mart Museum is one of several institutions that house material and present the story in a compelling way. Then there are Charleston's numerous house museums. The Aiken-Rhett House shown here is a time capsule, untouched, with original family furnishings, and really a preservation time capsule that shows, and some of the rooms are still a little worse for wear, but it's one of the more remarkable presentations you'll ever see. Owned and operated by the Charleston Museum, the Hayward, Washington House was built in 1772 for rice planter Thomas Hayward Jr. became a Patriot leader and one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Famously, in 1791, the city of Charleston rented the house to George Washington for his week-long stay in town, hence it got that name. It's furnished with some of the crown jewels of the Charleston Museum's collection and is a national landmark. The Joseph Manigault House is also owned and operated by the Charleston Museum, and famously gave birth to the Preservation Society of Charleston in 1920 when it was saved from demolition that year. It is designed in 1803 by Gabriel Manigault for his brother and is a acclaimed National Historic Landmark in the so-called Federal or Adams style with that wonderful bow bay window and oval rooms. There are many more house museums. I'm not going to show them all here, but one of the lesser known treasures is this house and workshop of Thomas Elf, a cabinet maker from Charleston whose work is on display at the Charleston Museum and elsewhere, and gives interpretive tours that talk about the trades in colonial Charleston. Charleston is such a preservation gold mine that it has spawned the first accredited college in the United States devoted to the building arts, the American College of Building Arts, that is training professionals in the various crafts and technologies of preservation and restoration. Some of the city's public buildings and houses of worship also double as historical attractions. The Charleston County Courthouse, designed in about 1791 in the neoclassical style, was actually designed by James Hoban and became actually a model for his most famous building in the United States, the White House. George Washington undoubtedly saw this building under construction when he was in residence in Charleston in 1791 and summoned Hoban to Philadelphia to discuss the designed for the presidential mansion, for which he was awarded the contract the next year. Upstairs in this building is a historic courtroom chamber with incredible sculpture, statuary, and works of art on display, well worth a detour. Charleston's most renowned performing arts venue, the Dock Street Theater. The original building actually opened in 1736 and is regarded as the first building in America designed for use as a theater. It had some ups and downs, and in the 1930s it was revived and restored as an adjunct to the Planters Hotel. On the outskirts of town, and not to be missed, is a historic Magnolia Cemetery founded in 1850, a veritable sculpture park filled with ironwork and stained glass and architectural jewels and botanical specimens overlooking the river. It's a beautiful spot. A few miles from downtown Charleston are several of the most famous plantation restorations in the country, the largest of those being Middleton Place, with home residence for several generations of the Middleton family. Founded in the 1730s, had an illustrious Revolutionary War and antebellum history, fell into neglect in the later 19th century, and in the 19-teens the family began to restore it. In the 1970s it was transferred to a Middleton Place Foundation, and today does hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, and is just a thriving multi-dimensional visitor experience. Middleton Place is also home to the oldest landscape gardens in the United States. The trades and crafts of the colonial and early national period are displayed. Historic trees situated on the Ashley River. It is a scenic wonderland. Also, don't miss the swamps and alligators. They're there. A neglected part of the history years ago. Today, the institution of slavery is presented with intelligence, candor, and extraordinary details and specificity. This is one of the surviving slave habitations, cabins on the property at Middleton Place, and some of the exhibits contained therein. Another nearby plantation, Magnolia, is most famous for its swamps and cypress knees and beautiful landscaped setting. The most famous of the Charleston area plantations along the Ashley River is Drayton Hall, a property operated by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It presents a full interpretation of the historic plantation economy, both black and white, and it was built in the 1740s, one of the most perfectly realized expressions of Palladian-influenced architecture in the United States. The plantation was based on indigo and rice, and what's amazing about this property is that the way it's presented, there's no furnishings, it's just architecture. It's the shell of this incredibly intact building that is brought to life by these remarkable docents and interpreters. It's an experience unique in America. An increasingly popular and authentic aspect of the Charleston experience is the heritage of the Gullahs, the descendants of enslaved Africans who lived in the Low Country region and traced their origin to the West African culture. There's just the storytelling, cuisine, music, folk beliefs, crafts, farming and fishing traditions all exhibit strong influences from that heritage. They speak an English-based Creole language containing many African loan words and significant influence from African languages. This is a really important part of the Charleston experience. Throughout the historic district, one sees the horse and buggy tours in season. There are probably 100 restaurants, many shopping amenities. Again, the thing that makes Charleston special is the multidimensionality of it. With tourism comes high-end retail and the shopping amenities, some incredible stores and unique specialty items. A strong sense of place and a vibrant tourism economy also supports galleries and the work of living artists. Mary White, whose depictions of Southern cultural heritage are so unique and compelling, made a great success of this work. Now let's take a look across the border at the historic capital of New France. Quebec City is larger than Charleston, but much smaller than Boston, about the size of Greater Hartford or New Orleans. Tourism plays an important role in its economy. Indeed, cultural heritage and economic prosperity fuel one another. The province, Canada's second most populous, welcomes about 26 million foreign tourists per year, but most of the tourism to Quebec City is, in fact, domestic, with the city attracting about 8 million visitors per year, two-thirds from within the province. Quebec City is the only fortified city in North America and has its own unmistakable Old World European cachet. Quebec City was named a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1985 and in 2008 celebrated its 400th anniversary. Famously, Quebec has endured 40 years of agitation for national sovereignty and has a complex and ambiguous relationship with the rest of Canada, helped along by an economy that has one of the highest growth rates in Canada. Quebec has one of the world's largest reserves of fresh water and has been described as a potential clean energy superpower. The fourth largest producer of hydroelectricity in the world, it relies almost exclusively on this source of renewable energy for its electricity needs. Je me souviens. This is the provincial motto, and it simply states, I remember. This is what they remember, being the capital of a vast North American empire that stretched from the St. Lawrence all the way down to New Orleans and throughout the heartland into the Great Lakes and beyond. The English and the French were at war almost constantly from the 1690s until 1759, when on the Plains of Abraham the standoff between Generals Montcalm and Wolfe resulted in the dominance of New France by the English. The French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War as it is known in Canada, was one of the defining military events of the 18th century and really set the stage for the American Revolution. On September 13th, 1759, General James Wolfe defeated General Louis Joseph de Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham. France ceded its North American possessions to Great Britain through the Treaty of Paris in 1763 in favor of gaining the island of Guadeloupe for its then lucrative sugarcane industry. One of the most famous history paintings of the era by Benjamin West is The Death of General Wolfe, shown here, in which Wolfe is sort of depicted is looking Christ-like in the scenes of the Lamentation with the Virgin Mary, and it's all very symbolic and of an epic moment. Given its strategic location at the narrows of the St. Lawrence, military defense has been an important part of Quebec's history. The citadel shown here was built after the War of 1812, but it never saw use. After the siege of 1759 and then the invasion during the American Revolution, the province was understandably self-conscious about military preparedness. Quebec's status as the only fortified city in North America, at least north of Mexico, is one of its claims to fame, and these gates and fortified walls surround the old part of the city. The stories of Quebec are told vividly in the abundance of public statuary scattered around the historic district. On the right is Bishop Francois de Laval, first Roman Catholic bishop of New France, appointed in 1659 and the founder of the Grand Seminary. He was beatified by Pope John Paul in 1980 and is a candidate for sainthood. On the left is Francois Xavier Garneau, a 19th century historian, poet, and civil servant who wrote a history of Canada in the 1840s as a response to the famous Durham report, which argued this was a British political document that argued that French Canadian culture was stagnant and would be best served through Anglophone assimilation. This was a wake-up call to reaffirm the cultural heritage of the Francophone French culture, and it 150 years later has proven utterly dominant. Quebec City is a provincial capital, and its Parliament building is one of the great landmarks and tourist destinations in this capital city. Built in 1893 by the Canadian Pacific Railway, the Chateau Frontenac is regarded as the most photographed hotel in the world, overlooking the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's also the city's most prominent landmark. In the historic district inside the walled city are hundreds of historic buildings and meandering streets that are a feast for the eye and a perfect example of a kind of walking pedestrian experience. French architecture has a distinctive indigenous quality. Some of the buildings date back to the early 18th century. Most are from the early 19th, but the variety, texture, and forms are endlessly varied and interesting. Religious tourism is one of the distinctive features of the Quebec experience. This is the Augustine Museum of the Augustinian Monastery. The Augustinian nuns founded their mission in the 1640s, and this monastery is best known for its hospital, which still operates today, but again, this is part of the heritage experience. On the left and upper right is the most famous religious landmark in Quebec City, the Notre Basilica, the Cathedral, the parish church of the oldest Catholic parish in North America. It's been located on that site since 1647, but the cathedral has twice been destroyed by fire, first during the Siege of Quebec in 1759 and again in 1922. Interior and exterior features incorporate elements from the reconstructions of the 1780s, 1840s, and 1920s. The cathedral was richly decorated with impressive works of art, stained glass windows, paintings, and a chancel lamp donated by Louis XIV. And the lower right is the Notre de Victoire, a small Catholic stone church in the lower part of the city that was where construction started in 1687 on the site of Samuel de Champlain's first settlement. From the time of British conquest in 1763 well through the 19th century, there was a strong Anglophone presence in Quebec City. In fact, in the 1860s, 40% of the residents of the city spoke English as a first language, and this community built churches and landmarks of their own. On the left is the Cathedral of Holy Trinity, which was founded in the 1760s by decree of King George III, who actually donated religious objects and kept a special pew in this cathedral. It was opened in 1804, and on the right is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, which owed its origins to the French and Indian War. General Wolfe's army and the Fraser Highlanders were of Scotch descent. Eventually they built this building, which opened in 1810. Quebec is unrivaled as a pedestrian's experience in walking city, with the upper town and lower town connected on this steep bluff by a funicular, and again, lots of shops and restaurants and cobbled streets. Quebec City is famous for its restaurants and traditional foodways, more than 100 restaurants in the historic district alone. It's important to note that the tourism economy here is really relatively recent. In the 1960s, it was probably a quarter of what it is today. Quebec City has dozens of art galleries. Among the most popular are with those that sell the folk art by the Inuit peoples of the northern reaches of Quebec and Ontario. There are galleries that specialize in the work of Quebec artists. This is the work of Jeanette LeBlond, who uses antique furniture and artifacts as a kind of canvas for her depictions of historic scenes from the 1860s to 1920s, a real kind of evocative sense of cultural heritage through a living art. Wayfinding and interpretive signage are all executed with great care and concern for the visitor experience. On the street interpretation includes signage that merchants occupying historic buildings can kind of roll out in the morning and provide visitors with a little perspective on where they are. Then there is this fascinating novelty, a recent replication in topiary of the famous Hope Gate that for a century marked the roadway entrance to the upper city from the lower city. It was demolished in the 1870s when fortifications became obsolete. Its creative replication speaks to the deep engagement with history that makes the Quebec experience so unique. Quebec City has numerous murals and large-scale mural projects that again reference their history in a creative, celebratory, and informative way. Street performers, mimes, and musicians performing the indigenous folk music, cultural heritage music of their native Quebec. The Museum of Civilization, designed by architect Moshe Safdie, opened its doors to the public in 1988 and stages state-of-the-art exhibitions, really designed for the kind of scale audience that Quebec City has. When you expect 1 million visitors a year, you can really do amazing things. The National Museum of Fine Arts in Quebec, founded in 1933 as the Musee De Bazar, consists of 3 buildings, one of which is an adaptive reuse of the old prison that is filled 25,000 works, mostly produced in Quebec or by Quebec artists. It is a cultural shrine to the creative sensibilities of its place. The Ursuline Convent of Quebec City, founded in 1639, is the oldest institution of learning for women in North America. Today the convent operates a museum and a school. The museum, nobody even knew what they had there until 1936, when the Ursulines for the first time revealed this incredible treasure trove that they'd preserved of altar fronts, waxworks, gold leaf, wood carving. The women in the convent had long traditions of crafts and handiwork, and these collections are astonishing. The Musee De Fort, located in the most prominent plaza in the upper city, is a diorama sound and light show that tells the military history of invasions over time in Quebec City. In 1995, the Museum of Civilization, in partnership with the Ancient Seminary, founded by Bishop Francois Laval in 1663, combined to create the Musée de l'Amérique française, a state-of-the-art exhibit facility that examines the settlement and development of French culture on the North American continent. The seminary's in-house museum collection, formed beginning about 1800, includes 17th through 19th century scientific instruments, ancient coins and metals, mineralogy, natural history, as well as paintings, ethnology, and ancient books. It's a spectacular history museum. The Musée de Place Royale first opened to the public in 1999 and is also a component of the Museum of Civilization that it specializes in archaeology and other facets of local history, and is sited on the location that Samuel de Champlain, founded his first French settlement in 1608. Scholarship and discoveries continue. Overseen by Parks Canada, on a location under Dufresne Terrace near the Chateau Frontenac, is this major archaeological research project at the Chateau National Historic Site. Here was the location of the Chateau St. Louis, in the official residence of the French governor of New France. Not enough to have great treasures. Since 1894, the Quebec Winter Carnival has been an annual institution that, with attractions such as skiing, snow rafting, ice sculptures. It has run without interruption since 1955, the year that they built the first ice palace for Bonhomme, who is the carnival mascot. The Bonhomme de Neige, the snowman, is the official ambassador of the festivals. He's a large snowman sporting a red cap, black buttons, and an arrow sash, a type of colorful French Canadian clothing used in the 19th century. This festival attracts hundreds of thousands of people during a couple weeks in February. Throughout the year and in all seasons, Quebec has more than 24 festivals, special events that really program this remarkable historic environment. The Fête de la Nouvelle France is a week-long major event in August where allows visitors to relive the 17th century. So it's a kind of a history festival. There are also festivals for Celtic music. There's a gay and lesbian festival. There's a dance festival. There's an open studio festival. There are music festivals that celebrate and focus on Francophone music. There's a Christmas festival that features competition in the culinary arts and wine. Again, this is a city that is programmed to the hilt. A few miles north of Quebec City is Mount Morency Falls, one of the great scenic attractions in Quebec, and every summer they have this international fireworks competition that is an amazing experience. In 2008, Quebec celebrated the 400th anniversary of the settlement of the city by Samuel de Champlain, and there were many events and special activities, including this incredible video projection. They claimed it was the largest projector ever been mounted, a 200 feet long video display multimedia display that told the story of 400 years of Quebec. A big part of the Quebec experience just north of the city is Ile d'Orleans, a large island in the St. Lawrence River that for most of its 375-year history was the only way you could get there was by boat. There was a bridge built in the middle of the 20th century, but it is still an agricultural area and a focal point for agritourism. Traditional, historic, agrarian, it's hard to believe that an area this beautiful and interesting is so close to the center of the city. The farms, the architecture, it all evokes a world almost untouched by the 20th century. And yet their cutting-edge practices involving agritourism and creative accommodations of the locavore movement and local foods and crafts, very 21st century. In addition to farming, the Ile d'Orleans has craftsmen, art galleries, restaurants, bakeries. It's an extraordinary place. The vernacular architecture, even of the 19th century, little changed from the early 18th century. One really feels that they're in a place with an indigenous architectural heritage. The Ile d'Orleans is about 3 miles from downtown Quebec City, and the island is one of the first parts of the province to be colonized by the French and has been described as a microcosm of traditional Quebec and the birthplace of Francophone culture in North America. It's about 21 miles long, 5 miles wide, and is composed of 6 municipalities, each with their own parish churches and village centers. Deepening sense of place is not about scale. Places like Charleston, Quebec, Paris, Rome, Boston, Newport, and Philadelphia will get much more traffic and attention than most places. But the fact that remains that for every place that capitalizes effectively on their cultural heritage, there are 20 that have much to offer show and tell, but have failed to make much of it, where placemaking tactics and thinking will make a difference. Here's a small town in Connecticut that has bettered itself through a few strategic nips and tugs. houses, fountains, public buildings, statuary, a beautiful public green, all bespeak a community with a strong sense of refinement and self-awareness about how it presents itself. Of course, this didn't happen by accident. In fact, one family played a disproportionate role in the beautification and improvement of the town. On the upper left there is Reverend M.I. Robbins, who was the first minister in town. And in the center, his grandson, Robbins Patel, who the family built a great fortune in actually dairy products, shipping milk and cheese and milk products to New York City from the hinterland in Connecticut, and built this extraordinary mansion known as White House in the upper right here. Robbins Patel's daughter, Ellen, and her husband, Carl Steckel, were great patrons of music, and in the end wound up leaving the estate and this extraordinary music facility and endowment to Yale University. In 1906, the Steckels commissioned architect Eric Rossiter to build this acoustically perfect performance facility known as the Music Shed. Legendary classical music artists have performed there, and for over 75 years, the Norfolk Chamber Music Festival each summer has operated a schedule of programs that are first-rate. One of the most picturesque buildings in Norfolk, the Norfolk Town Hall, actually was abandoned for over a decade. Built in 1883 by the Norfolk Women's Aid Society, it was designed by New York architect J. Cleveland Cady, and it really looked like it was kind of down and out, and then a sort of white knight came in with not only a concept but a design plan that really transformed it. Rechristened Infinity Hall, this is now one of the most popular performing arts venues in the state, with hosting almost 200 rock, blues, folk, bluegrass, all kinds of musical acts through the season, with a wonderful restaurant, and again leveraging Norfolk's reputation as a music center and really creating here the music center in Connecticut. A short walk across the green is the community-based Norfolk Historical Society, which collects and preserves artifacts and archives and mounts an ambitious schedule of exhibitions and programs throughout the year. The Historical Society is part of the glue that holds the cultural heritage and life of the community together. Again, they mount wonderful exhibitions on African Americans, on photography, on local trades and industries. It's again an incubator of ideas, of an interpretation and awareness of the community's cultural heritage. Of course, it helps to have money and leadership. Location matters, timing matters, but most of all, vision, imagination, and determination matter. Placemaking is an art. It helps to have what preservationists call good bones, but it also helps to have a compelling narrative. Placemaking is as much about community organizing as it is about design or even amenities. There is a role for projects and design within the placemaking process, but at the end of the day, the X factor is leadership. As we saw in Charleston, two individuals with influence and connections played a major role in launching the Spoleto Festival, which played a major role in the Charleston Renaissance. Politics was also important in Quebec, where the drumbeat of independence has prompted the national government of Canada to make disproportionate investments in the amenities and marketing of that nation's most historic city. In Norfolk, it helped to have a family with the means and vision, and a major university with a stake in it, to make it work. But at the end of the day, it was teamwork and the laying on of hands by diverse stakeholders that made it work. As you go forward, reflect on what places mean to you. Anyone can envision opportunities that make a difference. Making a difference will generate opportunities for you personally and for the places you love.